Yes, guys, welcome back to the Cannon podcast. Happy Monday. Hope you're having a very lovely day so far. I'm having a lovely day because for the first time on the Cannon podcast, on the main podcast, which is actually mad, it is all three of us. That's been the idea for so long, but we've never made it work. I'm here with Rohan and George. Hello, boys. How are you? You good?
Doing great.
All good. It's that first initial day at school, and you're happy. You get to see your friends. You're back in your homeroom, and you're like, "Yes, they're all here.
We're all here, the boys, the boys." But Rohan's in India next week, so
they're not next week. The week after. The week
after. Okay, it all falls apart. And we are also here after a very important win for the Arsenal over the weekend, and a kind of huge weekend, really, just in terms of like sort of Amarim's first game, City, I think Pep losing 5 in a row for the first time in his career. Am I correct in saying that? Liverpool looking unbelievable, obviously, against Southampton, and they're of course going to win the league. But yeah, it's been a big weekend. We'll come to the game in a second and sort of the specifics of that game against Nottingham Forest. There's so much to talk about there. But I want to start on the title race in general. We are three fairly similarly minded guys. I would say we probably, as a three, agree on most things. But one thing we certainly agreed upon was the sort of the panic around Arsenal probably didn't warrant some of the heights that it reached. But it's difficult, as always. It's difficult to say who's really panicking, whether it's just social media. But Rohan, I'll come to you first. This has felt like a really vindicating weekend for me, just in terms of like my feelings around Arsenal, in terms of we are still a good team. We are still in the title race. Other teams will drop points. We're not the only team with problems. It's not ignoring our problems. We have them. We'll talk about them today. But it felt like a real weekend of like return to like, okay, it's good. We're fine.
Yeah. Now, it felt like it was a return to normality, really, wasn't it? Especially when you consider what we've been doing for a couple of seasons now under Mikel consistently. And I felt that we'll obviously get into the game more, but for me, this weekend was more about showing people that Arsenal are still a very good football team. That was very important. I felt that we kind of showed, well, we've said it many times now, the last couple of games that we've had in which the results haven't gone the way that we would have liked, but there were small nuggets of information / wisdom in those games that gave certainly me confidence, and it gave you two confidence as well that Arsenal are kind of getting closer to clicking. And yesterday was a great example of that against a team that a lot of people are looking at it and thinking it is a banana skin, especially when you're looking at what Forest have done this season so far, being one of the most potent teams in transition. But we dealt with it really well. And what made it even better was the results at the Etihad, and surprise, teams are going to drop points, and it's just, we've said it many times, in that this is a season in which there are so many variables that are going to be difficult to predict with confidence, and there's going to be a lot of these types of game weeks in which certain teams are going to drop points, and then it's down on you to capitalize. And this is why I just didn't worry in comparison to other Arsenal fans that I did see online. And I understand that, because it is frustrating the start that we've had this season so far. There are things that we could have done better, but there's a lot of football still to play. And even, in the Liverpool game, I think nobody was expecting Southampton to get something, but I think the manner of the game and what actually unfolded, I think gave a lot of other people confidence that, this Liverpool team as well, that there are cracks. And obviously there were always cracks, and it's going to be a long season. And I said yesterday, I just think, stay locked in. There's going to be so many twists and turns still to come, and it's just a long way to go. That's the way I see it.
George, I saw this meme the other day that said something along the lines of, your 20s are a series of basically remembering really basic facts. Like, I feel better when I drink water. If I go to sleep earlier, I feel better the next day. And I feel like the start of this season has slightly been that, in terms of when teams lose good players, they look worse. It's like, yeah, well done. When a team's best player is performing well, i.e. Mo Salah, a team looks really good. And I think the sort of the basics of football have kind of come home a lot in the sort of the opening sort of months of the season. I think the point with Liverpool and the point with City and the point with all of this, and my feeling was always, it's such a long season, as Rohan was referring to. you can't draw any huge conclusions. And so you have to return to the controllables. And it's kind of what Rohan was saying. The controllables are, can you build up? Can you access the centre? And that's a question mark for Arsenal. Can you get your players in good positions? Can you push your lineup? Can you continue with your football principles? Do all the things that made Arsenal so good. And those controllables, there was always signs, I feel. Not that we've I think we're out the woods completely, but as we were sort of saying, it's a return to form. And I think the big thing that I take away is, it's such a long season. This idea that Liverpool and we'll go through adversity again, but this idea that Liverpool and City were never going to go through adversity, I just found mad. I just really found mad. So, yeah, I mean, overall thoughts on sort of the title race at the moment.
I have a feeling that there's a lot of frustration and projection for where we are because it's not where we expect it to be. And that more of the time is what's defining our season than really what we're seeing in terms of other people's performances, our performances. And people are having a tough time with understanding that there is no clear story because we're in unknown territory. And there's a lot of saying, well, how can you be certain this will play out this way? How can you be certain our story will play out in the way that you feel? And how can you be certain that there's going to be somebody that's going to stand tall and be a firm title favorite in what has been a firm title favorite for 5 years, where Pep has consistently been the one where it's a very clear standard to reach for 5 years. And that no longer is the case. A City-less, or a Rodri-less City, rather, are not a Pep team of the last 5 years. That's quite significant. A Pep team that has lost, 5 in a row, like you said, is not a Pep team. And then you're talking about Liverpool and saying, look, they've got 4 potentially all-time players, but have a bedrock and are behind a manager that we haven't seen for the last 4 to 5 years, who previously were in obscurity. And then you've got an Arsenal team who, for whatever good context reason, for 2 years have sat there to challenge the best team in the country, but have failed to do so. And have failed to do so in circumstances where they had the tools to do it. And so there's questions. How can you turn it around? Who's going to lead? At this point in the season, I'm sitting there saying, every team is flawed. And as basic as it is, the most consistent team will win the title. And I think it's even more so the case this year. And I look at every team with having a major flaw in it, mainly for Arsenal. I think there's a lot more context involved, but there's some individual things that we've done in this run-in. We've had a lot of injuries. We've been subject to a lot of decisions where we can't play 11 men. There's the context, but also I think our response to those injuries and not being able to play 11 men hasn't been the best. And so there was a little bit of individual responsibility that I would place on us. So fundamentally, it just left us in a place where we're flawed. We've shown we're flawed, and it's kind of reflective in the table. Then you have a look at, Liverpool, who I think remind me quite a bit of our Unai Emery run, and even our first half of 22-23 as an Arsenal team, in which we were flying at the start of the season result-wise, but had some very clear structural issues that we had to address, and if we didn't address, could form to fall away. Yet to be seen where Liverpool stand against a much harder fixture list and under more consistent injuries and a lack of being able to play their players. And then you move on to City, who, again, we've seen their story play out. We know who they are when fit, but then when you have such a major injury in Rodri, you go and start to lose 5 games in a row, which you haven't done in over 5 years. So there's a question mark there. And I think it just ultimately leaves a lot of people frustrated because this was the year entering the title that the process and even the faith in it meant you had to get the silverware. And I think everybody had this expectation in which, okay, last year was your first time in a title race. The next year you go on and you do it. And for as many people that have said, I trust the process, there's a lot of fans that haven't and don't and had to be quiet because the team was performing to a degree that their expectations said they would. And now when it isn't, it's a little bit of a case of, I can say I told you so. And I think it's too early. Yeah. I just fundamentally think it's too early, whether you're right or you're wrong, and whether titles happen or not. 12 games inside 38 games is factually never a trend for any story, positive or negative. So for me, I see the reasons we can do it. I see the reasons we can't do it. I have faith that we can do it. But can I sit there confidently and definitively tell you how the story is going to go? No, and I don't think anybody logically can. And that's where I am at with it.
And I think that was always the crux of it for me, was that, yeah, as you allude to, whether we win it or we don't, or this happens, or 12 games in, you can't definitively say anything. And I think that when you come back to what you were referring to earlier in terms of the Rodriguez City and all the question marks around Slot and the things we are yet to see, it's just impossible to kind of predict. Which, Rohan, is obviously uncomfortable for fans. You know, we want a clear narrative. And I think sort of the shape of seasons over the last couple of years, certainly for us, it's been, we've sort of got really close and sort of fallen away at the end, and City have just been consistent and won it every year. And I just don't see the league doing that this year, which is scary, but also quite exciting. And I also feel a massive, I think it's been coming for a while, but I do feel an equalization across the league. I genuinely feel this is the most any team can beat anyone Premier League era or Premier League season we've ever seen. I'm watching Ipswich and I am blown away by some of their in possession stuff. Amari Hutchinson on the inside looks unbelievable. By the way, there's a conversation about Saka there, right? But like, you know, I'm looking at Southampton, even the way that like they were breaking through Liverpool's press. I didn't see Liverpool break through Southampton's press once in terms of the ideas. Yeah. All across the league, in terms of the quality of the coaching, in terms of some of the players. Dibbling's bottom of the league. He's unbelievable. So the equalising of quality across the league makes this even more unpredictable. So it's going to be a long journey.
It is. And that's what makes it kind of exciting as well, because like I said at the start of this, you know, there are so many variables that you can't predict. And I think I kind of get it where, you know, and even from my perspective as well, before the season began, I felt that, you know, we need to kind of maximize our first 19 games of the season. That's where we can really kind of, you know, lead from the front and then, you know, have the type of season that we had towards the end of the previous campaign. But football doesn't always work like that. There's been a lot of things that have happened that has led to the start that we have had. And at the same time, Liverpool, I think, have had quite a lot of fortune in terms of the injuries and being able to pick a settled 11. And now, fair play to them because, you know, you still have to perform and they have done well. But I just see a lot of flaws in that team that gives me confidence that, you know, this isn't over. And that's excluding the idea of just 12 games in. You know, a title race is never over 12 games in. You know, we've been watching football for many years, you know, and every single team does go through adversity. The key is that when a team does go through adversity, we are now at a stage where we need to capitalize because we don't have the margin that we did have previously. That's not to say that we can't slip up anymore. We can. But when Liverpool do slip up, that's where we need to capitalize. Where City slip up, that's where we need to capitalize. And I think the Rodri injury, I think, is a massive factor. You know, when we're looking at City, like I tweeted out yesterday where, you know, Arsenal fans online, and I know we always go on about how you say Arsenal fans online, everyone's saying this, but maybe it's just a small pool. But there is the narrative of, you know, what are you seeing from the first 12 games of the league this season to give yourself confidence that Arsenal are going to run? That is one thing that has been said. But at the same time, people are also saying, you know, Man City are going to go on a run. Forget about how they're playing. You know, it doesn't match up, you know, and what the reality of the story is that it is going to be very difficult to predict. But what I do know is if Arsenal can keep certain players fit, which is what we've seen in our last few games, you know, there's a lot of potential for this team and we can reach the heights that we had done in the first 19 games of the 22-23 season. The second half of the season last year, you know, in 2024, where we're operating at 100-point pace in the league. So I'm excited. I'm quietly confident, you know, and I feel this team is clicking now, and that's what gets me excited because we've got a good run of fixtures as well, as what we've pointed out many times as well.
Absolutely.
You know what? Also, like, sorry, just to like really quickly butt in, it has nothing to do even with a fixture consideration for me. Mm-hmm. I find it absolutely ridiculous that the amount of fans, including our own, want to make the point that if we're going to say that Rodri and the City injuries have a point to play about the season, why have Arsenal's injuries not been highlighted to the same degree in terms of their title winning credentials? We have yet to see a starting midfield that we had planned from the season start all season. Mikel Marino and Calafiori, the solutions to the left-hand side that we had bought, whether you agree with them or not, let's not debate whether they're good players or not, but the team's solution has played a total of about 110 minutes in the season. I guess I'm very confused why there is justification for one point and not for another. And that's a very complicated way of saying we haven't been able to field an 11. We have yet to do it. Now, we may not across the season, and you don't know. It's about your response to those injuries, and our response hasn't been perfect. So people have rightful questions, but I sit there really like confused why we can't admit that we've been dealt a difficult hand, and it's about consistency and response at that point. And those are things that we have either hopeful or more pessimistic views, depending on what kind of fan you are, and they're both equally as valid as each other. But to dismiss the other is crazy.
Yeah, and I think some fans do hear that and see that, and I think some fans don't, and it's difficult. You'd have to ask each individual fan. I do what I want to come back to the controllables and kind of move to the game, because my encouragement comes from what we can control, and I think we saw a lot of that yesterday against Nottingham Forest. Sorry, not yesterday, because this is Monday. We're definitely recording on Monday. On Saturday against Nottingham Forest. I'm really pleased with how we approached the game. Really, really pleased. I want to come on to it now. In terms of the tactical side of the game, in terms of the technical execution of the game, in terms of the story of the game, not allowing it to run away from us. Really pleased with many, many aspects. And I want to start with the lineup, really, because there were some questions about the lineup, and I'll come to you first, Rohan. There were some question marks around the selection, and of specifically probably Jesus, Jorginho, and Trossard. I think probably people thought there were some other things going on there, but it felt like, both watching the game and in the lineup, there was more of an emphasis on the technicality than the physicality. And I think this is something that Mikel maybe hasn't always got right, and I think is something that's worth considering moving forward. How do we balance out those strong, dual winning, Marinos, the Rices, the Calafioris, the Gabriels, those guys in our team against the technical quality in our team? How do we balance that? Yesterday, it felt like we got that right. Now, in a different game, in a different context, you need a different balance, of course. But I think that is a big thing for me. And I think yesterday I felt like we could control the ball. We could hold on to it. We could pass it and accurately. And just, we talk a lot about, the tactics and the formations and how you access areas and whatever. But that's all underpinned by execution. Ability to receive and pass. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
To find someone in an area, you have to be able to play the ball, right? So I think we got that balance right yesterday, and I'm curious on your thoughts on that.
It's interesting because, the point that you made about Mikel not necessarily always getting it right in terms of technicality and physicality, we can kind of quickly look at the Newcastle game, for example, where, the only time which we've beaten Newcastle, Eddie Howe's Newcastle at St. James's Park, has been where we prioritised technicality, because Mikel has alluded to we can't go physical versus physical. And then that's the frustration for fans and this is why I think, it is okay to criticise Arteta in terms of not always getting it right, because when we look at our last two games at St. James's Park, we've gone more physical, and then we've lost both games. So it's quite frustrating in that aspect. In terms of yesterday, I can't lie, I do feel like this lineup was more down to how players kind of reacted post-international break. I think it's more down on that, as opposed to looking strictly at
and the fixture list as well coming up.
Possibly. I mean, I just don't know if I've got the evidence in front of me to say that Mikel had rotated this team and did it even though players were all fully fit. I felt like the likes of Declan Rice, the likes of Kai Havertz, Martinelli doesn't always tend to start quickly after coming back from international break as well. Maybe that played a part as well. But actually, I did like the balance of the team when I actually looked at it, because I felt, in terms of what Nottingham Forest were going to do, this is one of the teams that are the most potent in transition so far. They have, I think, the third lowest possession numbers in the league this season. So it is going to be a game in which we're going to be camped inside their own half, deep and having a lot of territory. And we kind of favoured those players who were more ball to feet, in tight spaces. And I felt that the balance was good there. Now, whether that was a case of Arteta looked at Nottingham Forest, or was it a case of he had to do that because of certain players not being ready? I don't know. But what I will say is that it is a long season. And as much as, both, us three, we may not be so keen on certain players, everyone needs to be used and everyone needs to give their impact, because, like I said, it's going to be a long season. I think the likes of Jorginho, the likes of Gabriel Jesus, we're going to need them. And I felt that there was some really positive performances there, particularly from Jorginho, I felt, who obviously came off more down to the fact that he was on a yellow card. But yeah, it was interesting. I felt that, that technicality kind of shone through as well as the game unfolded. And, there was a lot of really encouraging sequences, a lot of things that we've seen time and time again from Arsenal. And like I said, it was a reminder of just how good this team is. And yeah.
and how good these players are and can be. And George, they're sort of I was really pleased by the tempo we played at. I was really pleased by the touches, apart from maybe Jesus's, as we discussed on the instant reaction. But just in terms of the quality that was on display, it felt like in everyone's actions there was a return to a focus, a concentration. I would say almost all of Raya's distribution was accurate. It was clean. The execution yesterday felt like it returned. Before we get into the tactics, the execution returned to something I'm really pleased with.
I think it was because the technical leaders in the team stepped up, which is not something that you could say for the period that we missed Martin Odegaard. Yeah. You look at your best players in the match, right? Bukayo Saka, Martin Odegaard, William Saliba. Jorginho, I'd say, had a very good game. Yep. Like, those are your technical leaders along the spine. And if you're going to play that way, it's important that they have a good game. And then everything flows from that point. And I think the only thing I will say is, I even said it, I think, on the IR, is I was a little bit different from you, Rohan, and I thought it was a brave lineup. I thought, okay, I can understand the idea about having a small space lineup full of technicians. But as you said, they are probably the best transition team outside the top six. And I mean, from a kryptonite standpoint, we saw it in moments. I mean, when he was able to get kind of through the channels, but I just think the way we won our individual battles meant that we weren't maybe at risk of seeing a classic Nottingham Forest transition, but they certainly could have undone that lineup in terms of it, for me, being quite small, not maybe the big space runners that you're used to. And I thought it was brave from Mikel to say, listen, no, this tactic of us camping in their half is going to be something we're going to commit to. And it left a lot of space. And so I think it could have been undone, but I think a lot of people had good games. You know, I look at Trossard, who I felt ironically was actually quite good in terms of his technical retention, something he hasn't been able to do for weeks. And then you've got Jesus, who I thought didn't have the best technical retention, but very bright movement. The movement all match from Jesus was brilliant in terms of him being able to drop in blindsided, the pivot in midfield, really stretch the back line. And so there was basically our spine had a brilliant game technically, which I think you should expect, but isn't something we've done in recent weeks. And then everybody else around it supplemented it with good performances, things that you could build upon. And that created probably one of our most fluid performances all season, to be honest with you.
I loved your carefully selected compliment for Trossard there. Very well worded. Yeah, because his technical retention was brilliant, but there were other aspects of his game that were poor. And you just have bad days. You know, anyone who plays Black Ops 6 here or plays Call of Duty, you know, you just have days where your shot's off, and it just happens, right? So it's one of those things. I also felt though that we didn't rip up the rule book, but tactically, I felt we had a really nice day. And there was a number of little things I want to sort of come to. I'll start with Jorginho. I thought Jorginho was brilliant, and something I said on the instant reaction I want to put to you, Rohan, is I feel like he has people like this phrase, so I'll use it again, a pass palette that is the most refined in our system in terms of knowing when to go, in terms of to play that risky pass, because he does do it, when to recycle. It feels like the tempo he has just right, and it feels like he sort of has that awareness of where other people are, the big picture stuff, to go, okay, we're in a position now to step forward, and sometimes actually I'm going to retain the ball and I'm going to go backwards, or I'm just going to play a short pass or just slow things down for a second. I think sometimes it's easy when you've been on a bit of a bad run to go, right, we've got to go all guns blazing, Arsenal 22-23 early season. But actually what I felt was we got more technical, we got more refined, we got more mature. It felt like that with Jorginho in the team. And I thought tactically he was a brilliant inclusion. I don't know how much of it was enforced because of Rice or Partey. I don't know exactly how that happened, but I just think as the base of the team, he's not right for every game. Of course he's not. He's getting yellow cards and that's happening. But I think he really brought the progression to our game. And the sort of in every aspect of the progression that you can have, he brought such sort of refinement. I loved it.
Yeah, I actually think, you know, when we're talking about value for money, the likes of, and I know he's had a pretty bad spell this season, and the opinion on Trossard has changed quite drastically, but I would say he's been very good value for money. And equally, I think Jorginho too has been such value for money. And one of the things that I like about Jorginho is that he knows his limitations. He knows he's not a player who's going to be able to cover every blade of grass. He knows that physically he is not there. And you saw it in that moment in which he did make that tactical foul and draw the yellow card. But in terms of in possession, I think pass palette's quite a nice one, actually, because what I find with Jorginho a lot is that he just, like, there's times in which we're looking to switch it to the far side, and it's kind of like the opposition knows it's happening, and then when Jorginho receives it, he recognises a gap to keep allowing us to play on the same side, and he exploits it. You know, he did it a couple of times yesterday. But I think the point that you made about the tempo control and knowing when to recycle, knowing when to kind of slow the game down, that is something that I don't think we have always gotten right over the years, particularly with, I know the Thomas Partey fans may not like this, but I feel sometimes with Thomas Partey, in which, you know, we are accelerating too much, which, by the way, does offer its advantages. But
in some games and some situations.
It does, but at the same time, you know, sometimes when the game doesn't need to be stretched, especially when we are talking about a Nottingham Forest team, who we've seen what they've done this season so far with Elanga and Hudson-Odoi. You know, sometimes you don't want the game to become that. And actually, if you go watch back the first couple of minutes of the game, it was a little bit stretched. You know, Forest had that quick attack very early on, and I think it was Elanga who put it across the face of goal, and it was, you know, quite close to Hudson-Odoi. But yeah, I just think with Jorginho, he's a player I don't think we've used enough of this season so far. You know, and that's been quite annoying for me, because I think Jorginho last season, you know, when we obviously had adversity and went on that poor run in December, and then going into the new year, we needed a little bit of a change. You know, Jorginho coming in with Declan Rice normally as that midfield, it gave us a lot of balance. And I think this season as well, when he has been given opportunities, he's looked good, you know, and this is not someone we're going to be able to rinse like a bar of soap. And I think we know that, and we don't need to. But I think certain games, like yesterday, it does make sense, even though, as George alluded to, it can be a risk as well, because sometimes, you know, when you look at the potency of what Forest had, you know, you can leave yourself a little bit worried when you don't have the ball and the game is a little bit stretched.
And I actually think Jorginho as well, probably not exactly where I want him, higher in the pockets, but ahead of the ball as well is more secure and allows us to access the centre a little bit more. George, we recorded enough together. I knew exactly what we were talking about in the instant reaction when you talk about the ball progression in terms of where we do it. And there's a great sort of data viz, I suppose, from Data Analytics EPL, which talks about Arsenal's ball progression this season in terms of the proportion of where it is. And Arsenal have the lowest up to November the 21st, so before the Forest game, Arsenal had the lowest 0.7 of successful ball progression through the middle third. 85.2% goes through the flanks and 13.1 goes in the half spaces. I felt Jorginho, and obviously the inclusion of Odegaard, massively addressed that. But I'm just so curious on your take yesterday, because I felt as though centrally we've managed to find things a little bit easier. Felt like we found Saka out wide, which I think was partly due to Timber and Odegaard's movement becoming a little bit more narrow and creating that isolation. But I thought we found those central areas, as we haven't done before this season specifically. And to be fair, just a slight addendum to that, I think Arteta does sort of emphasise the wide areas, but it has been an issue for us even with that said.
So I'm going to come at it at a very different angle. So I think it comes down to our fullbacks, really simply. Have a look at who started the match and what it opens on which side of the pitch. And, you know, I love Urian Timber. I love him so much. Everybody knows how much I talk about him and what I think of his potential in the team. But what his knock, or his impact that has downstream from being at left back, the angles he produces in build up and where that funnels, which isn't a fault of his own. He's a brilliant footballer with an excellent passing range and very good in tight areas. I mean, a lot of people say central passing, you must be a quick turner in space. Like, you know, you must be somebody that's fluid on the half turn. Those things equal central progression. I don't necessarily agree. I think it's all about angles, being able to open different sides of the pitch early, and then being able to exploit them when it's on, having the bravery to do so. And I think that having two fullbacks that were able to both underlap and overlap and face to open the side of the pitch that they're dominant on is important. It means that, you know, decisions are made earlier. It means people can make runs quicker because they're able to find people sooner. And I think those are the things that improve. And when you start doing those things, enough opportunities open. You combine that with, again, I must say, for somebody that had a big trampoline touch, Jesus had brilliant movement. He was very important in terms of pulling the back line apart and making them follow him into pockets they didn't want to follow in. So once we had those angles opened up from a build-up standpoint, we had basically a striker that was asking decisions for the back line to follow them into midfield when they didn't want to go, because Forest had this 4-2-4 kind of block mainly. And so that was essentially stopping central progression was their standpoint, and also stopping box entries was their hope. But with Jesus's movement, I think what we were able to do is, the fullbacks were able to support the middle third far better than what our flat midfield three used to be with Declan Rice, Thomas Partey, and Marino. That's the first thing. Second thing, beyond just the fullbacks opening up spaces that they didn't, I thought that we had two central midfielders who were able to overlap across the pitch, not up and down, but across the pitch in Marino and Odegaard, which is going to be incredibly important to central progression. How many times do we see Marino drop into the right-hand side situationally to create an overload and slip in somebody? These guys are able to go between both sides of the pitch. And not to get too technical, but I think in the period where we didn't have Odegaard, our team became very much the left team and the right team. There was very little connection between the two. And people were playing in the right or on the left. And there was very little happening in the middle third. And part of that came because of the formation we employed, but also from the types of profiles that we had. And I just think that Calafiori had a fairly subdued game. And it was, incredibly interesting to watch. I think it was a very selfless performance from Calafiori, and selfless being the correct term, because I don't think we've had enough of that on the left. We've had that on the right, plenty, but we don't have that on the left. And when you have it on one side of the pitch, it becomes predictable. So from my standpoint, I think those are the big things that opened up central progression. And of course, I do think there was a part of us actually more willing to shoot. That definitely was the case, more willing to play the pass. There was a lot of punchy passing tempo. There was very little times that I felt that the ball slowed. If anything, I thought there was an emphasis. Everybody seemed to be told, I'd rather you overhit than underhit the ball. Yeah. And there was a little bit of that impetus there.
I also think with it, and sometimes the best solution is simplicity. And one of the things that I took from yesterday was that when we look at both through the right and the left, and I've mentioned it so many times in terms of the flow of the game and how we can kind of access the final third in a natural way that allows other players to be platform better. And I'm looking at Bukayo Saka, for example, in terms of what he was able to do. You look at his goal, for example, and the spaces that he was able to exploit. But broadly speaking, I think people don't realize the impact don't understand the level of impact that having a left footer in build-up through the left, the influence and the way that it kind of helps those ahead has. You look at Calafiori and also Gabriel, who, by the way, I thought had a really good game in terms of on the ball. The way that they're able to kind of pass the ball from out to in, it allows Trossard to stay higher up the pitch and receiving face in play. Whereas if you go back to the Chelsea game, for example, Declan Rice, in that role when he's trying to drop deeper and he's stepping outside of the block and he's situationally as that left centre-back, he does it well, and he's very good in terms of opening his body and switching it to the far side. But in terms of progression through the left, being a right footer, and when he's playing that ball, it means the winger's facing back to play, as opposed to receiving it with his body open and able to take his man on, able to immediately fix the fullback 1v1. And these sorts of things really do help the flow of the game. And we saw that through the right as well. What I found interesting, and we'll probably get into it, Jurriën Timber. And we mentioned it before in terms of the difference in a Timber and a Ben White, but how both offer so many good qualities, where Timber, if you notice, when we are going into the final third, and it is Odegaard dropping deep, with a Ben White, he's looking to overlap and he's pushing Saka inside in that way. Whereas Timber, he's making the underlap and he's dragging a central midfielder away from the centre to allow Saka to come inside. Both doing the same thing, but in a different way. But the main thing that I want to stress is the fact that right footers through the right and left footers through the left, it makes a massive difference in terms of how we're able to flow and how those units are able to kind of work with each other and the chemistry. And that's why it was really fluid for me, and Marino as well, being naturally left footed as well. Those simple things, they make such a big difference. Yeah.
And the connection between both sides, I think, as they went across. I was really impressed with the way we sort of handled the shape of the game as well. I was looking at Scott Willis's numbers in terms of breaking the game up into quarters. In the first quarter, Arsenal were at 92.5% field tilt to Nottingham Forest's 7.5, obviously. Then we went to 73.8. Then we went up down to 47.8. Then went up to 56.5. And it did feel as though there was a sort of a natural shape of the game where we went and sort of imposed ourselves, then pulled back a touch, and then went back a little bit towards the end. And I thought we handled it really well. I want to come on to sort of the events. Saka's goal. Woo! What a shot. There is this thing where when someone can just put their foot through a ball, it's so satisfying. It's so satisfying. And that finish, the way he did it, the strength, the fact that I just knew it was coming because it's Saka at this point, which is just so nice. It's such a nice feeling to have in your team. Rohan, I'll come to you. That was, it was an unbelievable finish.
I don't think we're deeping the campaign he's having. Like
I've got a number.
Have you got it? I've
got
sent
some numbers.
I've sent
Hang
it.
on.
So if we look at the season so far, right, and I tweeted it out today, and we look at all the games Saka's played in, right, and forget about the vast majority of moments in these games, but if we look strictly at certain situations, right, and in every single game, against Wolves, a goal and assist, Villa, an assist, and also the Trossard goal didn't count as an assist, but it was his cutback that led to that finish in that game. Brighton assist for Havertz's goal. Spurs assist. City assist. Leicester, 8 chances created, 4 big chances created. Southampton, a goal and 2 assists. Liverpool, a goal. Newcastle, put it on a plate for Rice in the dying embers of the game. Put it on a plate for him. Chelsea, put it on a plate for someone in the box to gamble. Mikel Marino, I think he can do better in that situation there. And yesterday, a goal and assist. Every single game he's played this season, forget about the overall performances because we could dive even deeper into what he's doing in these games. But every single game, he's produced at least one massive moment of quality. And there's a level of inevitability with Bukayo Saka that we know how good he is. This is a player who has been performing consistently for nearly 5 years now, half a decade, right? But what he's doing this season, he's managed to kind of surpass what he's been doing in previous campaigns. And this is why, Alex, and I don't want to bring it to this conversation, but this is why it frustrated me in the idea of Saka as a left back for England in terms of being that solution. I know I don't want to bring it back to this, but this is why it really annoyed me, because to put it simply, you do not move your best players to create balance for other players. You keep your best players where they should be and where they thrive at their best. And if you're looking to move other players, you move other players. You don't move. Do you move Kylian Mbappe if France are struggling in an area of the pitch? Do you move Messi? Did Wales move Gareth Bale? This is the frustration I have, because I saw you put it out about the Jamie Carragher, how England should be building their team around Phil Foden. Crazy levels of PR. He's a fantastic player, but Bukayo Saka, what he's been doing consistently for nearly 5 years now in the worst environments and the good environments, he's done it in every single environment, every single thing that he's faced, he's passed it with flying colours. And I just think we need to talk more about him, because when I'm looking at the league so far this season, there is only Mohamed Salah who's playing better than him. And that's an all-timer. That's the best winger the Premier League has seen, And Saka is second right now.
We for the listening pleasure, we won't relitigate the England thing, but I do want to read out this. I do want to read out this stat. Players with more than 60 goals and assists in the last 3 Premier League seasons: Mohamed Salah, Erling Haaland, and Bukayo Saka. And I think, we talk about, where is he in the conversations? Is he approaching? Is he whatever? For me, he is in that level of importance to the team.
Yeah.
If he's the most productive player in a title chasing team, he is in the Haaland, he is in the Salah conversation. He is that player. I think, George, we spoke obviously a lot, the summer, and we've spoken before, Rohan and stuff, about, where is Arsenal's kind of moments player, or where is that player who sort of gets us out of trouble. And I still think there's like a touch to go in terms of moments where Arsenal are playing really poorly and Saka sort of bails us out. But in terms of the player to build around, in terms of the player who is the face of the project, there is no doubt anymore. This is Arsenal's best player. He is in that Salah and Haaland conversation, both numbers-wise and just we can see it, right?
Yeah, I think the frustrating thing for me is when I have a look at the game as a whole, I felt like there was something that we could have employed a lot sooner. If I'm really being honest, there were some things that I felt like, yes, it was a fluid performance. Yes, there was a lot of really great things that I saw from individuals that I expected. But one thing that I looked at in the game that I felt like we could have done a little bit more is I think we could have had Ethan Nwaneri come on, and we could have had the midfield balance be a little bit more sooner than we had done in previous weeks. That's my biggest frustration when I take away from this game, because I think we opened areas of the pitch that we could have done a lot earlier, could have facilitated things a lot more. And I look at this game, I feel it's a missed opportunity for me. That's fundamentally what it is. And, it's great that we've been able to come out of this. It confirms a lot of the thoughts that I've had. And I hope that we have a whole section on Ethan Nwaneri, because the idea that he can't function for Martin Odegaard is something that I really push back on at this point. I think we're looking at now somebody who's our third top scorer or our second top scorer in general. So that for me is something that we've got to talk about.
We will come to Ethan, my friend. Don't worry. I want to come to Marino. I want to talk about Marino. I thought Marino was brilliant yesterday. And I think, Rohan, it feels to me, whenever Arsenal get a turnover in their favour, Marino is involved within the first three. Mm-hmm. He's either won it, or he wins the second ball, as in someone's gone to challenge and he wins the second ball, or he's the first out ball. So someone else wins it, someone else gets the second ball, and then is played to Marino. I'm almost certain that I'd put it at like 80, 85% of our turnovers. He is one of those three. He is so important to us in terms of winning the ball back. He's brilliant. I really, really like him. And he's such a rewatch player, Marino. Like, he really is.
I mean, you two did an in-depth on Marino, didn't you? So you knew what he was able to do. And for me personally, I didn't watch him a lot previously, and I looked more into the numbers and the data and the fit and how he was kind of used at Real Sociedad. And then I looked at the way that Arsenal use our left central midfielder. And it felt like a player who just screams functional. And I think the stock of Marino is rising slowly and slowly as each week passes now. I don't think it's like rising drastically, but what he's doing is he's going under the radar. And I think rewatch player is quite a good one, because when I watched it on yesterday live as a fan, emotional, I didn't really notice him much. But then when I watched it back, I thought, wow, he was actually really, really good, in a lot of things. And actually, the second ball winning, that was something that I took from it a lot, where every time there was a duel in that middle third, and it's Calafiori or it's Gabriel, competing for that first ball, it's Marino sweeping up for the second, and I felt that out of possession, he was fantastic yesterday. And also in possession, it's kind of crazy, because it's like sometimes when he has the ball in the pockets and he receives it in tight spaces, you feel he's going to lose the ball, but he never does. He just doesn't lose it. And if he does lose it, he'll either be fouled. And what I also really liked about him was the bravery in his passing. It didn't always come off, but he was willing to play it, through the lines in advanced positions and looking to pick up players in promising areas. And I like that a lot. And I do think that the what he's learning a lot now from what I didn't see in previous weeks, where he had some quite average games, was where the style takes a bit of time to learn, and there are certain automatisms.
That's what. That's what.
Automatisms.
Yes.
Yeah, it is as well. Slowly cooking. Yeah, it is starting to click now as well, with some of the runs that he's making and his movement. And I do think that invest in his stocks, because he's really coming through now. And shock, a player needs a bit of time before you actually see his impact.
No. Of course not. Sure. Of course not. Martin Odegaard had another brilliant game yesterday. I think we were sort of talking on the instant reaction, George, about the impact he has or he can have, and how we judge Martin Odegaard. And I just think he is a player that you can't. I think you actually might have said exactly this. You can't judge him as a full output guy. You have to look at what he's doing holistically in the whole team. It feels like everyone takes their cue from Odegaard, both sort of, yes, okay, tactically and technically or whatever, but also just sort of mentally in terms of how we push forward, sort of where we're going to stand, sort of how we are and how we live as a team. He's so important to us. And yeah, I don't know, I can't help but come back to what I said at the start of the show. It's obvious. You miss Martin Odegaard, of course you do. So it's kind of, it's frustrating. So good to have him back. But yeah, what did you make of him yesterday?
I think Martin Odegaard was brilliant. I thought, well, the tough thing with me actually is there's going to be a lot said about his relationship with Saka. There has been a lot said about his relationship with Saka, and I think when you play this type of game, Martin Odegaard shines. The only thing that I will say is I think he's probably one of our best pocket players in terms of understanding the tempo and when to release from the middle third to the final third. And I think when we've missed that quite a bit, to be honest with you. And I think one of the really interesting dynamics that maybe we could pull apart later with more sample is what Yuri and Timber provides. So when Timber underlaps, it gives the space for Martin Odegaard to open up, and Saka can situationally come inside. And he can only do that when Jesus is overlapping wide. So I actually think the reason that Martin Odegaard really had such a brilliant game as well is the movement around him, and he had people to hit. And it was one of those cases where I felt like you surround Martin Odegaard with options, but movement, he is intelligent enough, and probably one of the most intelligent players in the 11, to pick apart those gaps, to pick apart those people and those runs. And so I think that's what makes him great. And we've just got to be able to find ourselves having kind of Martin Odegaard in those spaces more often. Because otherwise, I don't think we get the best out of our attacking unit. And he's really critical to that. And so I think from a balance perspective, he was there. He was doing things that we needed for quite a bit. I thought that also he showed a level of calm in pockets that maybe we hadn't really been doing in previous games. I felt far too often we treated the ball like a hot potato in the final third. Whether that's through a touch or even through interactions and passing, I just felt like there wasn't a calmness about Arsenal in the final third for the last couple of weeks. And I think there was a calmness to whatever Martin Odegaard was able to do yesterday. And he looked fit too. Yeah. I actually don't think he looked like he was kind of feeling any ailments at any point. I think he looked very sharp to me, which was something I think is brilliant because he didn't go at an international break. And he made the right decision in terms of being proactive there.
Yeah, and same with Saka. I felt they both massively benefit from the break. We've got a few questions about Ethan, so we'll give him his full juice later. But just finishing up on the game, just really pleasing to come back and have that performance after a break, which is always going to be tough. It's always going to be tough after an international break to come back together as a group, and then only a couple of days, players in Brazil or wherever they are coming back and putting that performance in. It felt incredibly professional. It felt really professional. It felt really well measured, controlled. There wasn't, we as fans panic, right? Of course we do, but I didn't feel that same panic. And I think I sort of alluded to this earlier, Rohan. Like sometimes when you're on a bad run, you want to absolutely overdo everything and go hell for leather and completely change everything up and move people around and do all this sort of stuff when you've had a poor game. But I sort of love that we didn't do that. We just went, no, we are a good team. We're okay. Put some better technical players on the team, be clear on our idea and our plan, and go out there and show people that we're still a good football team. We haven't lost that just because we've had a few poor results.
Yeah, and it's kind of like if you look back at some of the big moments, like for example the Thomas Partey goal. You look at the sequence and the build up to that. That is something that Arsenal have been doing time and time again. Saka receives it, he drags the backline deeper for his gravity, then someone makes that underlap to then open up the space just outside the edge of the box. You've got three players at the far side pinning, but also overloading, ready for a potential half-space cross, and then Thomas Partey just whacks it in and it's a goal. But it's the sequences, it's the patterns that are happening and the details there that shows that this team, very much knows the level, and they recognize that the idea, and if we keep doing these things that we've been doing for 2 years now, we'll be in a good place, and it's quite interesting because a lot of people kind of looked at that performance and felt it was kind of like 22-23 Arsenal, but that's just, for me, that's just the Arsenal that I know. The Arsenal that I know that I have seen regularly under Mikel Arteta doing things that didn't surprise me. There were no sequences yesterday and patterns that I've not seen before. But there doesn't always need to be something new. It just needs to be the things that has gotten us to where we are and why we continue to shower this team with praise over the years. Keep doing that. Most teams, in fact, not any team, I'd say, when we are at our best, can compete with us in the league. It's just a good weekend, wasn't it?
Really good. Really good. Let's move on to some questions from Discord and X. Let's come to this from Sam Sational. I'll come to you, George. How big a threat are Chelsea, not just for this season, but for next?
I don't know about this season. I still think that they're figuring themselves out. I think that a team with their financial capability, and I think a talent of their squad means that they're inevitably a team that's coming. I just don't know how fast they're able to pull it together. I'm not really involved with Chelsea's inner workings. The only thing I can say from the outside is I think that they're on the step to rebuilding a possession-based model that I think all the best teams are doing. There's going to come some friction with that. There's, in the next 18 months, there's going to be perhaps a drop, but they're going to come quite strong. And I think they're a team that's coming. I think out of the top six, of all the rebuilds, they're the most ready and primed to take the next step. But beyond that, I think as far as this season, we're going to see really bright moments and then some dips from them. But they're going to be a team that will hope to challenge for the top four, not necessarily a team I think I'd consider to be a title contender quite yet.
Yeah, I really like a lot of the talent. And that's why I kind of believe that can kind of come through for them. I mean, I look at Colwill, who I really like. I think Caicedo showing himself again. I really like Madueke, obviously Palmer. Felix, if you put him in the right situations, he is brilliant. I really like Gusto. There's a lot of players there that I look at and go, you've got a lot of ability. And if Reece James can stay fit, he says, they can be a problem for us. Rohan, have you watched much Chelsea?
Little bits. I think for me, the level of talent and the expenditure that we've seen.
And Lavia,
Lavia. The level of expenditure that we've seen, you kind of, all they needed is a coach who has a philosophy that is kind of with the modern trend. And that is what Maresca is. And I think what you're going to see with Chelsea, as George alluded to, some really big highs. I think they're going to give some teams batterings. I really do. I think you could see Chelsea hitting those 5-6-0s that they did. They scored 6 past Wolves, I think, on game week 2. But at the same time, you are going to see dips. What I will say with Chelsea is I feel like they could be a team that influences the title race, because I think it's one of those teams that are a banana skin. Like Liverpool, found it tricky against them. They showcased good quality against us as well, and likewise against City on the opening day. But yeah, I don't think they're ready for a title challenge. But I think next season they could make that step closer. But again, I just think compared to us and City over the course of 38 games, it's I don't see it yet.
I also think it's interesting that there does feel like a bit of a trend to me coming at the moment in terms of manager selection, with Amorim, with Maresca, probably with Slot, maybe slightly with Ange as well. In terms of when you're trying to rebuild something or a team's trying to get back to something, I feel like communication and a head coach who can communicate is becoming more significant than ever. And I look at I watched Amorim's first interview. Honestly, the way he dealt with the question about Casemiro and Rashford was like word perfect. In not his first language, it was word perfect. It was all about the players were given 5 days off, so that they weren't told that they can't fly. Would I have done it as a player? No, but also, I was in, and he was with Gary Neville. He's talking about, but you had a different culture. When you arrived, other players would have told you not to do that. So I have to create that. He's taking accountability. It was this brilliantly formed answer. And you can see United fans, and the ones that I know, are buzzing because they have someone who can communicate something to them. And I think that's similar. Maresca's maybe a little bit more pragmatic, but I think there is something in I watched Arne Slot on CBS and I was like, I really like him. I'm sorry, I really like him. There's something about in these rebuilds and these projects, and I think
connection, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it was slightly started by. Probably we're going to see it that way, but I think the Arteta thing, the fact he can communicate so well, I'm sure is in the minds of Chelsea and Liverpool and so on when they're picking managers. I think it's important, George.
It's connection to me. I mean, we don't want to be too meta, but football, a lot of it is about reaching people, and if you're able to reach people with a big scope and you're able to connect and become relatable, it's a powerful mixture. Yeah. As far as what tactics and what how you see the game. And every game model is very different, but getting people to follow you, that's good leadership, right? Like good leaders are engaged followers. And so if you're able to create that, you're going to have a team, a fan base, and a unit of people that are willing to fight for you. And I think that's really been the case when you look at really successful managers in the last, couple of years. I think that communication has become such a big thing. And especially in our generation. I don't know what it is, but I think you can call it maybe the rise of more awareness of mental health or whatever you want to call it. Connection and communication have been much bigger hallmarks of success as opposed to the old house mentality of just get through it, mate, kind of bear down, listen, get it in the mixer type of vibes. And those kind of mentality hasn't been accepted as much.
Pulis Allardyce mentality.
I guess when you hear from managers more, it becomes more important you used to be what? You wouldn't, if you even, say pre, Sky Sports, etc., you wouldn't even hear from them pre and post match. You might hear from, press conferences or whatever it might be, but you're hearing interviews and post and pre-match, and they're trying to get them at the halftime, and they're trying to get, in the program notes. You're hearing from this manager all the time. So if someone can put across a message, they have such a higher leverage, I think, these days to be able to get, get those couple of percentages and connect to people as George was alluding to. Let's come to this question on the Discord from Daft Punk. I doubt it's the Daft Punk, but you never know. With Ben White out and Tommy still struggling with injury, I have a feeling we might move for a right back in January. I really like the idea of a strong overlapping profile. We need someone else to hold width so Saka can play inside. Who would be your pick? I'll come to you, Rohan, for a player who could be realistically signed in January, or do you just overall agree with the idea?
I do think that we need that kind of right centre back, right back slash centre back as well. Although I do see Calafiori as having potential there. This is for me, it's largely due to what we see from Tomiyasu from now to the end of the season, really, and that's what that kind of questions we're alluding to. I think I'd hold back for now personally. I think we can kind of make do without it. I think. But then at the same time, it's difficult because Timber has came back from an ACL injury, and
are you?
I don't know.
Can I ask a question? Sorry to interrupt. Are you guys annoyed? Okay, let me put it this way: if we knew Ben White's injury was as bad as it is, it depends. Yeah, it depends on what we knew. It depends on what we knew. Yeah. If the club knew the extent of the Ben White injury before the season and waited till now to do it because they looked at the first sort of section of the season and went, we need you for that, and then we're going to do it. Are you annoyed? So conditional annoyance. Or is this just the case of like, look, they thought they could handle him. They have more information. Let's just assume that they did the best they could.
As somebody that's seen medicine, it's a very gray topic. So I don't want to assume anything. I will say 100% they knew about issues.
It's just
the extent to how he responds and what it was, and that's just speculation at that point. I will tell you personally, even if there was 50% of an issue, I don't understand why he didn't get it done because he didn't go away. He wasn't with England. So that's regardless of how serious it was, okay, look, there's on a scale of 1 to 100% you need surgery. Even if it's at 50%, 40%, he may need surgery down the line. Just do it. He's not going to internationals. Just do it anyways. And so that's where I'm at with it. Yeah. And so maybe there medically was not a big reason to do it. I just think it's proactive. And I would have done it anyways. But again, a lot of these things aren't black and white. There's some gray, and I don't have all the variables, so it's tough.
Yeah, we don't know. I mean, so Mikel said Ben is going to be out for a few months. The cookie. I accept cookies. Yes, here you go. It's been different kinds of struggles. It's never been the same thing. Arteta said of White's health at his news conference ahead of Arsenal's clash with Nottingham Forest on Saturday. It's not been improving. It's got to a point where we have to protect the player and let him have surgery. Unfortunately, it's going to be a few months. We have to see how he reacts post-surgery. So from those comments, it sounds like, yes, as George was saying, they knew there was a problem. I think we all knew Ben White has had some issue, and they thought it was going to improve, but it hasn't. So if that's the case, then kind of fair enough. But equally, if they knew there was a problem and you were kind of hoping it would improve, and you knew that on May the 29th or whatever, it's hard to know without all the information. It really is.
Yeah, it's frustrating. It's frustrating because the way it seems, we've seen Ben White play through injury. He's mentioned it many times, even in that interview with Ben Foster, and how he's got a high pain threshold, which obviously is admirable. And I always feel like with Ben White I could never knock him like that because when others haven't been available, he's the guy who steps up. And even though he may not be performing at his best, he's there and he's playing, and this is a guy who's consistently been, in terms of consistency, the best performing right back over the past 2 seasons. It's
also not his fault that Tomiyasu isn't fit.
No, it's not.
It's not on him. What can he do?
Yeah.
It's difficult to say. Returning to the question, George, in terms of sort of the overlapping profile, without Ben White? Is that like a loan thing we do? Is that you find a different way of doing it? What's your feelings?
I've always got a name, and I just think that there's an opportunity with him being iced out at Chelsea, and he's a top talent. Josh Ashimpong, I think, is incredible, and I would do everything to try to sign him. And whether that means loaning him out again, it's just he's in the last 18 months of his contract. He's a top talent. He is in that right center back, right back mold. And I think that we need it. It's a whole, I don't know when Tommy's going to be back. I don't know about Ben. That's 2 months. You're talking about a right back position fundamentally and relying on Urian Timber post ACL for at the busiest point in the Christmas season. Doesn't seem like great planning to me. We've got people in terms of Thomas Partey that may be able to fill in. But again, those are not serious solutions that I'd like to see long term. And so I think it's a position of need. It's a position that we would need to solve between now and the summer. And I look at him with 18 months left on his contract as a great opportunity to secure. So I would look towards something like that. But I think that everybody's going to be annoyed if we get another fullback. When we're looking but again, I do reiterate the story of this game for me was having fit fullbacks. I'm just saying, like, the way we attack our system and how we exploit spaces is through the wide spaces. Yeah. So I think making sure that those areas are secure is going to be important to the success of Arsenal's season and Arsenal's story. So that's why I would probably be more willing and actually insistent to address it in January than others.
Not to put my Tim Pot hat on, as you would say, George, but I do look at the fullbacks in general, and look at the fitness. I look at the fitness record of Timber's a bit unfair, but Tomiyasu, Tierney, Zinchenko, Ben White, Calafiori. Is there something here around our usage of fullbacks and or is that just pure Tim Pot stuff?
I don't think it's about usage. Because look, to be fair, Ben White's the wrong person to ask. He's like the most sprinting.
But he's always had issues, and he's got on the pitch. But you see what I mean? There's always been issues with him.
Look, fullback is the most demanding position in an Arsenal system, period. So like it's going to ultimately physically, always have but and also just in role, it's the most complex role. It's asked the most things and to be the most flexible continuously, right? You look at the story of the left back evolution from 2019, 2020 Arteta to now, it's a very different story. You look at the right back position, it's a very different story. It's an area of the pitch he likes to tinker, tweak, and demand more of. So from a role expectation sense, it's probably the one with the most turnover then.
George had to jet, so Rohan Light are going to finish up the pod. Question on Discord. No, question on X. Apologies. Lots of questions on X about Ethan Nwaneri. We're finally going to talk about him. Is Nwaneri better as a sub from Saka or Odegaard? That's from Alien Gunner. Highest ceiling between Saka and Nwaneri from Haj Mahal. Loads of questions about Nwaneri. Amazing day for him yesterday. An unbelievable day. He becomes Arsenal's second youngest ever goal scorer in the Premier League, just behind Cesc Fabregas, in a very different era of football as well, 20 years on, which is, really, really incredible. So happy for him. So happy for him. I said on the instant reaction, I literally stood up and applauded my television when he scored the goal. Yes. But yeah, I mean, we speak about Nwaneri a lot and the quality he has. How did you feel yesterday, just watching someone, one of our own, go and do that and be someone who is probably is he the best 17-year-old in the league? Like, it's certainly an argument, maybe Mikey Moore, whatever. He's so impressive.
Nah, it's Ethan, mate. It's Ethan. It's kind of it's good for our agenda as well, isn't it? In terms of our constantly pushing it. And there's a reason why we constantly pushed it, because the talent is crazy. The way I look at it is, lovers of football, forget about systems, tactics, etc. If you're a lover of football, you'll love Ethan Nwaneri. He just oozes quality. And like yesterday, I kind of know what I'm going to get from him. Every single touch, there's a purpose to it. The way he kind of increases the tempo of the game, the drive, the commitment, the confidence, personality, everything. For a 17-year-old, it's crazy. And it's kind of like, do you know what's even crazier? Is the fact that when he scored, it wasn't even a big celebration. It was kind of like, yeah, I know. Yeah, this is what I'm going to be doing. We've had frustrations over this in terms of how we wanted to see more of Ethan Nwaneri because we recognise the talent and the quality, and especially in the absence of Odegaard. And a lot of people don't agree with that. They believe with a 17-year-old, you need to manage him carefully, and what Mikel is doing is the correct way to do it. And I understand that argument, but I just feel with the way that we've played in previous weeks and what we've been missing, I look at what he offers, and when he's been given those opportunities, it's just a match made in heaven in terms of what we needed. And it's kind of like they aren't mutually exclusive. You know, they can happen at the same time, where I believe that Mikel Arteta rates Ethan Nwaneri massively because he has put him on in tougher game states than easier game states, really. You only do that if you rate the player, you know. But at the same time, I feel like we could have been a little bit more braver in terms of his usage. And that's despite the fact that he has played, you know, a fair amount of games already, you know, and minutes. But, mate, yesterday, it's like, when it's one of your own, it is a different feeling, and it just hits, like, and
so good.
I genuinely think that this is the talent that, you know, we struck gold with this one. You know, that's £100 million talent. Genuinely, he's that good.
Mikel, talking about him after the game, said, look at the two players you're throwing a lot of questions at. What I like is that he comes in, and in that context, the first thing he does is take a touch, run forward, run past two players, and put it inches away from the post, which is a very non-Mikel thing to say. I'm responsible to build a career for him. You have to do that brick by brick. Today, he put another brick. Now we have to put another cement, make sure it doesn't get dry, so we can put another one, and that will stick. Then we put one more layer. If you want to put 5 in a row, believe me, it won't work. We have to manage not only his expectation, but his load as well, which is really important. And I think that's a really key thing with managing young players. And I think Mikel's been quite conservative with this in the past, but, you know, there's a difference between throwing a player in and starting him in every single game and never playing him. I think he's finding a balance, all right, and as he should. And I think it's about not overloading him, putting him in situations where he can thrive. So towards the end of games, you know, because it's like that whole Trossard thing, isn't it? The moment he comes off the bench and scores, everyone goes, "Why isn't he starting?" Then he starts, and everyone goes, "Well, this is why he isn't starting." And then I think we'd see that with Ethan a little bit. So it's about putting him in good game states, which, as you mentioned as well, he obviously trusts him in big game states. About putting him in pockets where he can thrive, about taking the load off Odegaard a little bit, not overloading with minutes, but giving him enough minutes to sort of show him the pathway and so he can have an impact. And so when we think of Nwaneri, especially at this age, it's all positive. He's coming in and impacting games. We're not putting too much on him because with expectation, of course, you start to raise those standards and you say, "Oh, Ethan wasn't quite on it today," and you start forgetting he's 17. So that balance is really hard to find. But I do want to come back to what you said. I think £100 million talent, people will go, what? But why not? In terms of the impact he can have in that corridor, in the box, sort of from, I would say, the edge of the 6-yard box on the left-hand side of the goalie, on the right-hand side for us, out to probably near the centre circle, in that sort of between the half space. Every time he's in there, something happens. It's a combination. It's a shot. He takes someone on. His quality in there to separate the ball and have a shot, whatever it might be, is unbelievable. My question is that Odegaard's role? So how does that quite
that's what we
work together? About. That's my only real question about Ethan.
That's what we spoke about before, because, you know, on TCB Live we mentioned how we can kind of fit them all
Thursday
together.
Evenings, 7:30 p.m. Check it out.
And we kind of looked at, you know, Declan Rice, Odegaard, Nwaneri being that kind of midfield, but then we also have to consider the demands of the left centre midfielder in our system. And if I'm putting Ethan Nwaneri in there and we keep it the same way in terms of how we use it, it'd be too much for him. It'd be way too much for him because he's not that type of player. But I kind of came back from it yesterday and felt that if you look at our two natural number 8, like creative players there, Ethan Nwaneri and Martin Odegaard, to have those two, mate, we are blessed. We are actually blessed.
That's crazy.
You know.
I think at the moment, any idea of, like, you know, Rice, Ethan, Odegaard midfield as any kind of serious permanent solution, I think is too far.
Yeah, it's too far.
But yeah, there is that question mark of how you get them both in the team. I mean, first and foremost, Martin Odegaard can't play every minute, but also I think there's game states where we need a bit more impetus, where I would play Ethan, and there's game states where we need a little bit more control, and I would play Martin. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think this is, you know, sometimes we kind of want, what's the word? Want to destroy a good thing, but like you can get too much of a good thing, right? You see, he's really impacted in those last 10 minutes. So if we give him 20 minutes or we give him 45 minutes or 90 minutes, it'd be the same. no, I think the reason he's impacting is he has a short space of time. He can take on those actions. He's not expected necessarily to control the game. It's just go and show us your talent.
Yeah.
And that's where he's thriving. And I just want to be careful about giving him too much.
My brother's made a good. He said something quite interesting yesterday, in where he feels, Arsenal. He feels like Arsenal. Sometimes we play with our food too much. In box situations, we play with it too much. Sometimes someone like Ethan, like you said, when he receives it in a dangerous area, he's going to have a shot. He's going to pull the trigger, and sometimes you need that, and even yesterday, like I look at yesterday, and the big criticism that I would have on our performance was that the amount of situations we got ourselves into, that game from a 3-0 could have easily been a 5 or 6-0 had we have just been a bit more brave, and we didn't play with our food too much. We just looked to be a little bit more precise, and I don't know how to phrase it, but with Ethan, when he receives the ball in that space and he's driving at plays, there feels like a level of inevitability already. Now, I'm not inevitability in terms of he's going to score, he's going to assist. But as you alluded to, something is going to happen. Something. And that's crazy for a 17-year-old. And I'm not afraid to say this is a £100 million talent, because some of the things that I'm seeing him do, I've not seen before from a 17-year-old. Very few players are doing what he does, and that's what's crazy.
Yeah, he's so driven and so focused. There was a question which we should answer. Higher ceiling between Saka and Waneri?
Saka. It's the easy. Maybe it's a bit of a cop out as well. But
say Saka, because it's probably the right answer.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, we'll sort of close up the questions there, but I want to finish with this. I think we've got a real opportunity coming up, and we've kind of spoken about this a little bit before, but obviously naturally it's tinged with a bit of hopium. But we've seen a sample now. We've seen that sample of coming back and going, okay, no, we are still a good team. We're fine. Sporting on Tuesday. We're then, I think, away at West Ham following weekend. We've got a big run coming up. And I don't know. I think you can, we did, and we spent the international break talking about, we know we're a good team. We have this stuff. It was so nice to have that sort of validated. And I now feel really positive going into the next few weeks. I really feel, and I said this before, but I don't know. I think it got validated. I really feel we can go on a run now. I really do. Like, I really think this is the start of something. I quite strongly believe that I think probably by New Year's, around that time, we're going to look very, very different as a club. And I think people will see that.
If we do what we expect us to do from now till Christmas, I'd be shocked if the gap isn't around 5 points. If we do what we expect,
I think it'll be closer. I really do.
It could even be closer. They've got.
I think it'll be closer. City and Liverpool have got to play each other. Liverpool have got a really tough run coming up. Like, I think it'll be closer. I really do.
Yeah, but first and foremost, it's down on us, isn't it? It's down on us to continue to show that we're a really good football team. Like this weekend, it was a case of, Arsenal are still a very good football team. Shock for a lot of people, maybe not shock for us. But now it's like, okay, can Arsenal now build a run? And that's the next step. It's baby steps, isn't it? West Ham. Obviously Sporting on Tuesday, but I'm looking at a lot of that Premier League now. West Ham away from home, bearing in mind they've got no Kudus. I think he's serving a free match suspension.
5, isn't it?
Is it 5? Is it?
Maybe it might be 5. Yeah.
Yeah, but either way, he's out for our game. And West Ham haven't been good this season anyway. So, that's looking like a favourable fixture for us. And Liverpool play City, and I've always felt like you can have your preferred result, but the reality is that any result at this stage of the season is a good one. It is a good one, and it's a situation in which one of our competitors is going to drop points, and it's down on us to capitalise. And we take it from there. And I think, people will look at last season, how, we lost to, we dropped points against Fulham, in London, obviously against West Ham, etc. Because I think there was a comment about, us mentioning that Arsenal don't need to travel much, in this Christmas period. And people could argue, or look back at previous fixtures from last season, we dropped points in London, etc. That's fine, but the impact of travelling in a busy schedule is significant. It is, and that can play into our advantage, and we need to capitalise on it, because I felt that when I look at, over the years, the Christmas period, we've had some really difficult ones. I'd say this one that we have is pretty favourable, and we need to maximise it, and if we do that, we'll be in a good place, and I think a lot of opinions will change. Agree.
Really agree. Game by game, week by week. We'll get there. Thank Thank you for listening and watching. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, make sure you subscribe as well. Leave us a review. If you'd like to join us over on the Patreon and YouTube member side, you can. You get access to our Discord. You get access to all the ad-free content as well as exclusive content. And you join the Cannon community and pay for Rohan's new chair.
It didn't squeak today. I don't think it did.
It sounded great, man. It sounded great. And yeah, thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. We'll be back for an instant reaction after the Sporting game. Thanks for listening. And thanks for keeping Arsenal.